Now uh, I would like to take a brief moment to introduce Rebecca Lee. Rebecca has been coming to Vancouver every single year for a good number of years to give us Dharma talk and lead retreats. She's a meditation and Dharma teacher in the lineage of Chan Master Shen Yan, the founder of Dharma Drum Vancouver Center. Rebecca is the founder and guiding teacher of Chan Dharma Community. She's also a sociology professor and lives with her husband in New Jersey. Her talks and guided meditation can be found at her website, rebeccalee.org. And also here in my hand is her uh, latest books, Joy, Allow Joy into Our Hearts, a very, very good book. It's a compilation of her talks that she started to give during the very beginning of the pandemic. The teachings all here are very, very good. I highly recommend this book. Okay, now without further ado, let's welcome Rebecca Lee for the talk.
I always want to take this opportunity to welcome everyone who's joining us on live stream. Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are. So the topic I have set for today's talk, wisdom from the Shuragama Sutra in daily life, contemplating our sensory experiences. I often like to explain why I pick a topic. Um, this is obviously an extremely big topic, and in the introduction, Changwu Fashi kindly gave, it may set up the expectation that I'm going to talk about the entire Shuragama Sutra today, which is mission impossible. And so I'm going to help you adjust your expectation here. Um, this topic was picked when uh, I've been engaging in a book study with my students uh, using Master Shen Yan's book, Until We Reach Buddhahood. And if you have this, I recommend that you make good use of it. These records of lectures Master Shen Yan gave in the 80s when he was giving teachings on the Surangama Sutra. And I remember translating for him in the um, early 2000s when I moved to New Jersey, and he was still talking about the Surangama Sutra in the Sunday talks at the Chan Meditation Center. It's a fairly long sutra, and he went into it in a great deal of details. So the when I set this topic, we were studying these chapters in the early part of the sutra, where the Buddha was having this conversation with Ananda about the nature of seeing and hearing and smelling and tasting and touching. So some of you may be familiar with with that part of the sutra. And the Buddha took Ananda through the contemplation of the sensory experiences to help him recognize his erroneous views regarding sensory experiences. And it's helpful for us to see that we have the same erroneous views. That's to help us look into our mind. Um, the key erroneous view is our tendency to believe what we see and hear as real. That's what the word used by Master Shen Yan. Real, I need some explanation. We're not saying that you're hallucinating. Um, I am actually talking here. You're not imagining it. Right? So you are actually sitting in front of your computer or device hearing these sounds. So what Master Shin meant by saying that our tendency to believe what we see and hear as real refers to our very entrenched habit of believing that um, what we are hearing or seeing or through other sensory organs um, has an independently existing uh, ex- uh, uh, is an independently inherently existing object. And part of this process that get us to create this view involves locating the sensory experience as happening inside. So the Buddha took another, there's like, are you seeing inside? Where are you seeing? Is it inside your head, outside, on your eyes, your face? Where is it? To help him see that like we have these assumptions about there being the um, I experiencing something from the inside, um, and something's happening outside out there, and thus establishing this habit of duality, this very entrenched habit of dualistic thinking, of there being an independently existing me, the I, that is in opposition, at least with others, the non I, the world. And this habit of dualistic thinking blocks our ability to see the true nature of reality. Whenever we hear the word true nature, sounds very mysterious. Like, what is really actually going on is that everything, every moment is the coming together of many causes and conditions. And we call these experiences as seeing or hearing, and um, they are they are names, labels on we place on these experiences, believing that it is an independent entity is an illusion. That's what Master Shinyan meant. So I want to clarify that word right off the bat, in case you believe that's what he meant. That he was suggesting that we didn't what's happening in front of us. It's not actually happening. So in those chapters, the Buddha um, tried to explain the emptiness of sensory experiences. Again, the word emptiness here means that everything that's happening is the coming together of causes and conditions. And Master Shen Yan went into the detail of these sensory experiences we call seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and um, break down and identify the elements that's involved. So, for example, he talked about that seeing, what we call seeing, the event called seeing, really involves the coming together of these elements. If you really take a moment to think about it, what you're seeing right now involves the coming together of light and darkness. It's like if it's all light, you just see like a blur. There is no eyes and no dark hair here. It's light and darkness. And your sense organs that's working. So the eyes working, the nerve cells connecting to your brain from your eyes working. And also space, the space between your sense object and your sense organ. That's why you might remember the part of the chapter that the Buddha talked about, like, why is it you can't see your eyes? Because there's no space between your eyes and your eyes. You need space between the sense organ and the sense object. And highlighting that help us see that, oh, we're just kind of not aware of all the causes and conditions that are involved in the emergence of this event, this occurrence, we call seeing. We take for granted and we just make assumption that, oh, it's my eyes that's seeing, or that's my mind, there's a me that's seeing. Similarly, talked about hearing um, being a contrast of stillness and motion, really vibration. Like if you are into music, you know that very clearly. And also the sense organ and the space for sound to transmit. So went on to talk about these sensory experiences. They are all the coming together of sense objects, organs, and space in various conditions. So what we call seeing, hearing, and tasting and smelling, it's an occurrence. It's not inevitable. It does not happen if any of the elements is not there. And, and constantly changing because these conditions are changing. So um, I like to use a very concrete example, and so that you can stay with me to make use of this teaching. We sit here in the space we are, feeling the way we feel, and we do not think about how it is the coming together of causes and conditions that involves the humidity and temperature of the air in the space, in the room we're in, making contact with our skin. So that is to do with the sensory experience of touch. Of course, it also involves the sensory experience of tactile experience of your clothings on your skin as well. So are we aware of these changing sensory experiences? How do we react when these conditions change? If we do not understand that the present moment tactile sensation is empty, referring to the fact that this is a coming together of many causes and conditions. For example, like I mentioned, the humidity and temperature of air in the room, we are likely to react with vexations. And we don't even know that we are doing that because we might experience this change in humidity very often. For those of us who are living in North America, we are used to air conditioning, certain humidity control, feeling that the humidity is like stifling, is attacking me, causing me discomfort. How dare the air get so humid? We get upset and agitated. And that is a small example of how we have this very entrenched habit of experiencing the world, our environment, as being outside of us and often against us, causing us discomfort because that's not what we want, what we like. So I'd like you to stay with me to connect to experience like that. Um, and as practitioners, we practice cultivating clear awareness of sensory experiences and how we are generating vexations in reaction to them. Air is just air. It has a temperature and humidity. We generate vexations. We hate it. And then we generate suffering. And not only that, you might have done it yourself or witnessed other people doing that. When we suffer, we take our agitation and frustration out on others. Have you ever met people who sit here and it's like, it's really hot, and they get very agitated and they get very upset and agitated and started seeing that you are causing them problem and start yelling at you, losing their temper? So that's what happens when we are not aware that our sensory experience is empty. When we remember to practice and notice the changing humidity and temperature as part of the emerging present moment, then we'll be able to see that, yeah, okay, this is the coming together of causes and conditions. And it allows us to see clearly how we can respond appropriately, which is different from sitting here suffering, complaining, so hot, so humid, I can't believe it, I hate it. And then you started to cause problem for others around you. So when we practice this way, for first thing is we are capable of acknowledging that yes, it is warm and humid in here. Now, why do I point this out? I want to share this story with you years with Master Shen Yan. I still remember in this retreat when, for those of you who've been to the retreat center, it may be a little bit more relevant. Before we had the current uh, Chan Hall renovated, and and before we had retreats in the now dining hall, so it's really early. And I still remember we were sitting there for getting ready for a Dhamma talk, and Master Shinyan sat there. It's like, right, I need to go to the back to take off a layer of my clothes because it's too warm. He said he has been misinformed about the temperature and he had put too many layers of warm clothing underneath his robe. And this is getting too warm. I want to share this story because um, of the importance of acknowledging that right now you know that it is warm and humid. Instead of telling ourselves that it's empty, it's just my feeling about what's going on, and there's no warm, no cool, no humid, not humid. We tell ourselves it's all empty. That is denial of reality that we're living in. And maybe we learn to dull our awareness to tell ourselves so that we cannot feel what's going on. And we think it's good practice. We think we're practicing so well. I can't feel temperature. It's because we're dulling our awareness. That it is not causing us to suffer does not mean that it is not happening. So that's why I want to share this story with Master Shinyan. He's not sitting there like, I'm so hot, I can't believe it. He's getting all agitated. No, right? But he's like, yeah, this is really warm. And I'm going to sit here to give this talk. I'm going to be here for an hour and a half. It's like, I better go and take off a layer of clothes. That's the clarity of seeing that, yes, this is happening. It is warm here, it's humid here. And even though we may have very high tolerance for heat or humidity, perhaps because of it can be our practice, it can be our experience. Maybe we grew up in very warm places. This is not hot for you. Um, or our bodily condition. Some people, they're cold all the time. Now, it does not mean that the humidity and temperature is not what it is. And um, remembering that everything is causes and conditions, and our mental conditions shape our experience. In that way, we will be able to recognize that different people will experience the temperature and humidity differently. Remember, you may have high tolerance for this. Other people may be really uncomfortable in this condition. So um, denying denying that situation here, thinking that it is good practice can become an act of lack of compassion for others. So we may find, so of course the other way, the other direction may be the case, right? We may find the present moment temperature being intolerable or uncomfortable, while someone else find it comfortable. It's like, oh, I'm always cold, so I'm thank goodness this is finally like warm for me. I'm not cold. And in this situation, we'll be able to notice our tendency to think that something's wrong with other people because they don't experience the present moment the same way we do. Have you been in those situations? You sit here, it's like really cold, and someone said, "No, that's really fine." It's like, what's wrong with you? Like, what's wrong? And then maybe we can get into argument. Okay? And how do the reason why we will have that reaction of vexation is because of our not understanding, not remembering that our sensory experience is empty. It's the coming together of the causes and conditions, not just the temperature or humidity in the room, but also our own perception that's based on our experience, our bodily condition, and it varies from person to person. So this is when we notice our tendency to think that something's wrong with another person who don't experience the present moment the same way we do, we can make use of this as an opportunity to notice that sensory experiences are empty, that it is not something that is an independently, inherently existing entity. And when we can um, be clear about what's happening, then we have this clarity about what can be done and what cannot be done, and do what can be done and accept what cannot be done instead of suffering. So, for example, I'm going to stay with this example here. Okay, so this is warm here. What can we do? Like Master Shin, I'm going to take a moment to go to the back and take off a layer of clothes rather than sitting here like, I don't know, like people may think that, I'm not a good practitioner. I'm just going to sit here and suffer in this clothes and being too hot. And, this can be done. It's like, I'm going to tell them it's too warm. I go up to the back and take off a layer of clothes, change into lighter clothing, we drink water. If there's air conditioning in the room and it works, maybe we can turn it on. Have you thought about that? Now, some people can sit there and vex about it. So I don't know, maybe, I should just sit here and bear through it to be a good practitioner. Or of course, if we're outside, maybe we can move into a cooler spot with air movement because air movement reduces humidity right around your skin. So even though we are not suffering from what is going on and getting agitated, um, we may it is still not wisdom to cause bodily harm to ourselves. So, for example, if you're in a situation that is so hot that you can get heat stroke, I met people who've done that, who is like, I'm fine, and then they just passed out. And so, not cultivating this clear awareness to take good care of their own body. And if the causes and conditions are such that we can make the space more comfortable, reducing the humidity, for example, why not? Why not? Does it have something to do with our our fixed idea about what something is supposed to be? So, of course, insisting that like we should always, the room should always be at 72 degree and 55% humidity. That is attachment. And it causes suffering because the when the temperature deviates from that, stop, it's too hot. I know people like that who's constantly suffering from temperature and humidity. So I have this example very fresh in my mind. On the other hand, insisting on keeping the space hot and humid, even though we have a way to make it less so, perhaps believing that it is good practice, is also a form of self-centered attachment. It's an attachment to a fixed idea of what quote unquote good practice is, that maybe we have in our mind, believing that I'm supposed to be uncomfortable to be practicing. We're supposed to create an uncomfortable condition environment to be able to practice. That too is self-centered attachment. So as a practitioner, we can be at ease in any condition. So if causes and conditions are such that you can have air conditioning, it is fairly pleasant temperature, humidity, that's fine, that's okay. Well, grateful that the conditions are such. And when we find ourselves in situations that is more that does not provide that kind of amenities, some of you probably have been in situation where it's like over 100 degree and there's no air conditioning and you're like really uncomfortable, and you're okay too. That's fine. You know it's a little hot, warm and a little uncomfortable, but you're okay. We don't generate vexations. That is so it is not wisdom to ignore our bodily conditions. It is also not compassion to force others to endure discomfort when it is possible to make it less so. So, when the situation is that there is nothing we can do, air conditioner is not available or is broken, there's a heat wave. And I always like to use what Master Shen taught, always helpful. I'd share it with you. It's like, oh, this is a new experience. I've never been in 110-degree with no air conditioning. Yep, it is hot. Yep. And you experience it as a new experience with the beginner's mind and learn from that. And um, see that, oh, okay, yeah, it's uncomfortable, and but I'm okay. I used to believe I would die right away, but it's okay. I'm okay. I can do this for a little bit. So we learn something. We learn something about that how certain belief we held before may not really be valid. So very often, what we Master Shin pointed out that what we experience, our sensory experience, uh, what we believe we see and hear and taste, is an illusion. And I want to invite you to reflect on this. Again, illusion does not mean it's not happening. Okay, it means it really it is not what is actually touching your sense organ. We are often experiencing our idea. So food, the sensory experience of taste, it's a good place to explore that. I like to invite you to reflect on this. This was shared with what my students shared when we were studying this this part of the book, and it reminded me of an experience years ago. My husband and I are vegetarian, and we took his very meat eating um, grandmother to a vegetarian restaurant, and they had everything vegetarian, and so there's something that she thought tastes like turkey, and he couldn't believe it's not turkey. I was like, no, yeah, it's not turkey. And so she thought she was eating turkey. So what's she tasting? She's tasting her idea of what she was eating. And I have a nephew who hates eating eggs at home for breakfast. And his mom insisted that he eats eggs because that's, he needs the protein for breakfast. And he is so convinced that the eggs are bad, it tastes bad, that he would sometimes throw up so it's like a big scene. Now, he loves eating McDonald's breakfast eggs. So, so I was trying to help, like, okay, like, you eat eggs at McDonald's. You want me to take you to McDonald's all the time. So it's like, that's eggs. So he said, like, but that's McDonald's eggs. What is he eating? He is eating his idea. We think this is very funny. Do we do that? Do we do that? When we are eating, what are we eating? What are we tasting? We may like to reflect on our likes and dislikes involving food, to contemplate this this aspect of our sensory experience. Now, of course, food is necessary for our to provide nutrients of the body, but we often turn eating into something quite a bit more complicated. It is not just nutrients for the body. And taste, if we really reflect on it, contemplate it, the taste in the food is not inherent in the food, is it? So different people eat the same food. They have different experience. Have you noticed that? That's why some people like certain food, some people hate certain food, right? And also and it partly has to do with our sense organ. Some people are more sensitive to certain taste. So, for example, I can tell you, my tongue is very sensitive to salt. It's like there's very like the normal saltiness will taste extremely salty for me, and I know that. So, do we know how our sense organs work? And when we observe that the food that tastes okay, so that's actually an entry for me to contemplate the emptiness of the sensory experience of taste. That food that tastes okay, normal for everyone, would be very salty for me. So taste is a coming together of these causes and conditions. And so when we forget that, we may engage in the habits of imposing our preference for taste on others. Right? Like, this is really good. Why don't you like it? You should eat more of this. And cause conflict in our life. Does it sound familiar? Do people do that to you in your life, or do you do that to others? Uh, so uh, so when we practice and and remember that our sensory experience is empty, then we will remember that the same food will taste different for different people, and be understanding. That's part of being compassionate. rather than being harsh and judgmental. And as I mentioned earlier, we often are eating an idea rather than what we are actually tasting. And this idea in turn shapes our perception of our taste. So very often it affects our relationship with food. I had the student who talked about um, who talked about this tendency to feel to worry about being hungry. And he feels he had to have snacks around all day and worry about not having enough food all day long. And food is like a huge source of stress on retreats. There's a worry because if you've been in retreat, you only eat at a certain time of the day. So very often, we notice our how we experience taste this particular sensation is not as simple as we thought. As we begin to look into our relationship with food, when we practice eating meditation, we give ourselves an opportunity to notice um, our habits, and we cultivate this clear awareness of the changing sensations of food in our mouth, directly experience this taste. And we notice that they're constantly changing with the taste, the temperature, the texture of the food, and allow us to see what the Buddha meant by taste being empty. And we also can see that very clearly that we are full. We are no longer hungry and not compulsively put more food in our mouth. And many people struggle with this, and we can see this craving for more does not really have anything to do with the bodily needs. So the body needs food. So it's not about depriving ourselves of food, or it's not about depriving ourselves of yummy food. So if you like yummy food, good. If you're good at cooking, good for you. Cook some good food for yourself, cook some good food for other people. It does not need to be suffering if we are able to have this clear awareness of what it is that we are doing and tasting. And when we do, maybe we'll notice that our eating is perhaps a way to exert control to cope with anxiety. That's what this student of mine realized, that needing to have food around and control what you eat, think about food.
There's a realtor named Nicole Lee.
That, that notice that he has this belief. He has this belief that he's not going to have enough to eat when that is not validated. On retreats, he noticed there's no problem. He doesn't get hungry eating just 3 meals. So um, we and he realized that it is a way for him to cope with anxiety, and this is quite common for people this um, to have this relationship with food of the because of other areas in their life. And for some people, it may be a way to seek comfort, to control emotional pain. And when we have this awareness of what we are doing when we're eating, then we may be able to go seek appropriate support for our difficulty. And Master Shinyan talked about in these different sensory experiences, he focused on talking about seeing and hearing. He mentioned how, yes, there are all these different sensory experiences. Since seeing and hearing tend to affect and shape our experience, our mind, the most powerful. And very often we generate a lot of vexations and suffering as a result. And he offered some very practical advice on how to reduce vexations and sufferings in seeing and hearing in particular, which I think also can um, apply to others. And I want to share this with you, and you can give it a try and see how it goes for you. The first practice, the first tip he offered is to avoid unhelpful sensory exposures. Now, again, we first have to remember that um, what we expose ourselves to, what we see, what we hear, they all go into our mind. It shapes our experience. What we read, what we watch, what we listen to shapes our thoughts and feelings, which in turn shapes our view of ourselves, the world, and our relationship with the world and our actions. Have you ever thought about that? You might have an inkling that that's been the case. Do we know what we are feeding our mind? We are likely to know to have heard of the idea of junk food. We don't eat junk food. We want to try to eat healthy food, because junk food is unhealthy for the body. Are we feeding junk food for the mind? Do we know? Do we know? So, as a practitioner, we cultivate this clear awareness of what we are feeding our mind. Do we know what we are spending our time every day reading, watching, listening to? Surveys after surveys show how much time people spend on social media nowadays, looking at the phone or watching television or something, some kind of screen, some kind of media. And cultivating this clear awareness of what we expose to through seeing and hearing provides us with the opportunity to choose wisely. So this advice of avoid unhelpful sensory exposures, it's very, if we take it seriously, it's very deep. We discern what is causing agitation and vexations. So that means, how do you know? You have to pay attention while you are watching something, reading something, listening to something, while you are in the midst of hearing and seeing. And notice which one causes agitation, vexations. This has been shared to me many times over the last few years. I'm going to share with you. For example, one common example is highly sensationalized news reports. Does it sound familiar? So, highly sensationalized news reports. I use the word sensationalized sort of broadly, so like it's delivered in a certain way, or maybe certain content designed to invoke very strong emotional reactions, often hatred, so like to get you to want to watch more, to identify strongly with it, or to invoke the idea or the belief that there's a clear culprit. The situation is caused by some inherently evil, bad person, and or certain things being absolutely good or absolutely bad. Remember, we've been talking about everything's the coming together of causes and conditions. Same sense objects experienced differently by different people. Right? So anytime someone's trying to tell you, no, 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 it's all black and white, it's all absolute, and there's some inherently existing bad person or thing. Remember, remember, this may not be helpful. This, for one thing, are likely to perpetuate erroneous view. We already have a very strong tendency to think this way. We already have a tendency to believe that there is an inherently existing entity. We already do that. Now we are watching and listening to things that keep telling us that's what's happening, perpetuating, strengthening erroneous view, um, strengthening, feeding aversion. So some of you may have heard of Master Shen Yan's promotion of the protection of the spiritual environment. That's what he meant. Right? So, like, uh, do we know what we are feeding the mind? What we are? What's the spiritual environment? Our mind. Do we take good care of it? So ask ourselves: is it wisdom to keep feeding the mind with sensory exposures that perpetuate unhelpful habits of aversion and erroneous views that cause suffering for ourselves? And when we suffer, we tend to cause problems for others. Some of you hear this, it's like, oh, okay, I just, will not watch any news that will give me peace. That is not what we are talking about here. It does not mean putting our head in the sand and ignore what's going on. We always are ready to reach for easy solutions. What we need to do instead is to cultivate this clear awareness of the kind of sources we are choosing when we want to be informed about what is going on. Ask ourselves, is what I am reading, listening to, does it provide information and analysis that helps me gain a more in-depth and nuanced understanding? Very often when we are consuming media for some kind of uh, uh, to satisfy some kind of craving for sensory experiences, that's not what we are looking for. There's too nuanced. So is it right or wrong? Is it good or bad? Or who's the bad guy? Like, we are looking for something like that. That's out. We have that habit. So these sort of more nuanced approach, showing that there are different ways to understand this. We may not be interested. Then we say, oh, interesting. So am I actually here to understand what's going on? Ask ourselves. Or are we drawn to sources that present a certain perspective with which we already agree, and we are consuming them to validate our views, to make ourselves feel that I'm so right, feel more righteous about our ideas? It's not really about gaining new insights or to learn about the world. Do we know? Do we know I'm not telling you what to do. I'm asking you as a practitioner to understand, to cultivate clear awareness of what it is that you are actually doing. And if you choose to have more, to choose the kind of material that agitate the mind, then you know you have chosen to have more sensory exposures that generate agitation, vexations, and suffering. At least you know you're doing it. At least you know. And if you want to, it's like, okay, I kind of don't want to have so much vexations, then you know what you can do to um, to 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 reduce the exposure to these sources. And you will note you can do it as an experiment. Like if you love whatever thing that you read and watch, do an experiment. I reduce it, and then you can see how it changes your experience, and that will help you understand this teaching about emptiness of our sensory experience. What I just talked about, it's really easy to do in our present day news media environment. So I'm asking you to really take a good look to see if you know what we are doing when we are picking up our phone or switching on our television. Now, some of you may be like, I actually don't watch news. I just watch television. So again, you still ask yourself, what are we feeding our mind through sight and sound? Are they images that are designed to generate a sense of dissatisfaction and craving? All media, that's what they do, especially when they are funded by advertising. They are created to make you feel unhappy with your life, feeding you with images of a certain body type as ideal, or certain home decoration as the ideal, certain lifestyle as the ideal. After watching it for a few minutes, suddenly your life is not so good. And the advertiser is there to offer you a solution. Buy this, get this service. Do we know that is happening? Do we know? You may think, I'm not very materialistic. I think I'm immune to that. Don't be so sure. These media people, advertisers, are very good at what they do. When we think that we are immune, what we are essentially saying is that we are exempt from emptiness. Yeah, other people, when they watch TV, their mind's affected by that. Mind now. My mind is not empty. I have my mind and it's fixed. What I expose myself to doesn't change my mind. That's what you're saying. Do you think you're exempt from emptiness? When the reality is, what we expose the mind to becomes part of us. Even if we disagree with what is said, we pick up the style and tone of how things are presented. Check to see. If you don't believe me, go and check it out. So it does not mean that we become cut off from life, from society, go live in a cave. Right? Although research has shown that people who watch less television become happier. Research after research shows that. I'm not saying you should not watch television. It's more like being more discerning in choosing our sensory exposures. And perhaps also notice the sensory exposures that help us help us feel more connected with ourselves and more connected, more able to see that everything is interconnected. That's why so many people talk about the healing nature of being in nature. Make sure you schedule time to be out in nature so that you can hear birds singing with trees and running water and clouds and skies and breeze. And you know what? Because they're not there to sell us anything, in case you haven't noticed. They don't have an agenda. They're not there to brainwash us, to impose a certain worldview on us. Allowing ourselves to connect with ourselves by giving ourselves an opportunity to be there. And Master Shin also talked about the practice of um, not allowing the mind to dwell on what is seen and heard. Right? So, um, very briefly, talked about not reading too much into what we see and hear. So here, especially for folks who have this habit, it's like, did they really mean what they say? I don't know, and so then and vex over it a lot. And so notice our habits of creating stories or theories to fill the gaps left by incomplete information. Sometimes, and acknowledge that there's a lot of limitations in verbal communication. Just things are just not communicated completely clearly, and that's just what happens. And so um, we accept that, sometimes I just don't really know what's really going on. And sometimes we it's because we did not hear clearly, and that's some misunderstanding. And to help with that is to practice remembering to consider the other person's perspective. That's the part B of this, not allowing the mind dwell on what is seen and heard. So when we see that we are dwelling on it, we notice that, and we can sort of like, okay, I don't need to do that. It's kind of like gently stop doing that. And also P, to remember to consider other people's perspective. Very often when we suffer from what we hear and what we see, especially what other people are saying, um, maybe like at work or in the family, it has to do with our habit of being very self-absorbed, just thinking about how this is happening to me. And when we consider the other person's perspective, we'll be able to see that there's not a fixed thing that is happening out there with an inherent meaning. It's like you experience it this way, you approach the situation from your perspective because of your role, and someone else is approaching the situation from their role and their perspective. That will, and that's why they experience it the way they do. And that will so um, we that will help us recognize that we often see and hear not what's happening. What we see and hear is our idea of what is happening rather than what is actually happening. We do that to a situation, we do it to a person. Ask ourselves, am I seeing the person, or am I seeing my idea of that person? Chances are we are seeing and hearing our idea, not what is actually going on. When we can cultivate this clear awareness, then we can see more clearly how we are adding vexations to the situation, and as a result, cause suffering for ourselves, and very likely causing trouble for others. And in this way, we can practice to unlearn these habits and reduce vexations and suffering, which is the cultivation of wisdom. And when we can do that, we will also be able to treat others with more compassion. I want to end with this quote from the book that that Master Shen Yan said that can be helpful for us to guide us through this. It's on page 181. You can find it yourself as well, of volume 1 of this book. He said that the 5 senses must be approached in this way, which is to see phenomena as unreal. Unreal here meaning as empty, but act as if they are real. You must lick the honey. You must sustain yourself. Otherwise, you would die of starvation. But always be content and do not form attachments. To view the world as unreal, here again, remembering it's empty, and avoid attachment, and yet act as if everything is real and fulfill all responsibilities. This will achieve a balance that is safe and free from vexations. That's what I have been talking about in how to practice cultivating wisdom by contemplating our sensory experiences. Know that it is the coming together of causes and conditions, but recognize that it is happening so that we can fulfill our responsibilities, caring for ourselves and those around us, and taking care of our duties. So I hope this is useful for you and you can take it with you in your daily life practice, because we are always experiencing some kind of sensations through hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for this wonderful talk. Actually, it's, in our everyday life, almost every activities that we do, uh, we can make use of practice, a life practice, to really to see the deep uh, trench habit that we all have projected. Um, the world, the people that we see as we believe in, and and further solidified these ideas. So this is the beginning that we know how to change that, and and start to see things we'll experience very differently. Now we open floor for questions. I'm aware that we have a few friends that join us from Europe, from London. Uh, if you would like to raise questions, I don't know whether this is the first time that you're able to join us, and also the first time listen to the Dharma talk, Rebecca's Dharma talk. So please feel free to raise questions. You may use the icon raising hands, or simply raise your hand. That'll be fine. For some of you, if you are more comfortable to send in your questions in the chat room, please, you can also do that. And also, meanwhile, our tech person, could you also look up the Facebook to see any questions from the Facebook live stream? Okay, All right, Shin. Yeah, please go ahead. Shin is in London.
Hello,
Good
everyone.
afternoon.
Hello, hello, Charles, hello, Rebecca, and thank you for the wonderful talk. I have a question. You mentioned about the using technology today of tendency of check the forms, and I think I sometimes I feel the tendency, even form putting on side of me, I do have the desire of checking it if nothing actually come up. Do you have any kind of suggestions on when this occurs of how to best deal with that situation?
Thank you, Shin.
Thank you.
Yes, it is. You can say it's a form of addictive behavior. So, anyone addicted to your phone, and that's so you the again the practice is to cultivate this clear awareness of what's going on in our mind. So you can see that you are when an action when the behavior is compulsive, it is you do it and you don't even know. Like I'm still holding my phone now again, and before you know it, like hours has passed. You're like still holding your phone, or you put it down and then you pick it up again, and or you thought I'm going to check one thing, and then you check another thing, and then check another thing. Does it sound familiar? The compose that the so and you said I don't know what happened. 2 hours later, you haven't done anything, but you've been on your phone. So now that is when the practice of cultivating this clear awareness moment to moment will be very helpful. That like you first notice the thought of, oh, I wonder what is new now. There, you already spent 2 hours in the morning checking your news, and a few hours later, there's more news. Like what is going on here? Ask yourself, like, huh, maybe there isn't anything new. Of course, there's sometimes things are new. So, like, what is going on? So, you give you a moment between this thoughts and you're actually acting on it, so that it is not like you without thinking. You reached for your phone and you touch open that app, and to facilitate that. There I learned it from these tech experts. It's like to make it take longer for you to open that app. You put it in the folder and put that folder like in page 5 on your phone. So it involves deliberate action. So give you more time and space to get, and so every moment of your swiping through your phone, you can see the addictiveness of this. Like I have to go open that app. It's like, oh, I don't. It is my addictive tendency pushing me, pushing me. So now you have more time and space in between the thoughts and actually opening that app to see how addicted we are. And then you can see, oh, every moment we see that like I need to, I have to. It's like you can say, no, you don't. You don't. It is like, have you ever had a bag of chips in front of you? It's like, I'm gonna have one. Have you ever had that? And then you're holding an empty bag. Have you had that? And I don't know what happened. Uh, if you practice, you can go get a bag of I don't know popcorn or chips, whatever is your fave. You open it, like use like one, and then you see you eat it mindfully, and then you put it, and then you like one. You tell yourself one more, finish, and then check the thought and say, I know maybe one more, and then you just completely give that up. That's how you end up holding an empty bag instead of like okay one more, and then it's like, mm, you know, I think I can have 3 more, and after 3, I'm good. You eat 3, you close the bag, and you put it away. So, what it is that we work with ourselves. We work with ourselves. Um, Cutting anything cold turkey, unreasonable deprivation tend not to work so well. So if you're very addicted to your phone, you're just like, I'm not going to have my phone again. Like it may last 2 days, 1 day, and then you go back to it. Like so, it's like you give yourself a certain framework to work within, and work with your gently, and then you can slowly wean yourself off of that. Does that help? You want to give it a try?
Yeah, thank you. I can do go.
Mhm.
Thank you very much.
Louis?
Yes. Thank you very much, Rebecca. I've really enjoyed the lecture, and it hit close to home because since the end of November, I have not listened to the radio or watched television or gotten any news from social media other than through emails from friends or talking to friends. And what I have found is that there's a lens, and so I haven't, it hasn't been that I don't understand what's going on. I just get it through my friends, and I've been much more at peace. But part of that is that I find that it's easier for me to stop doing things than to have a balance. For example, it's easier if I don't buy the bag of chips, then I try to go over the amount of chips and to be controlling. So I have found for me it's much easier to stop something, to not do something, rather than to be balanced. So I know I should be more balanced in my life, but I find that sometimes it's either all or nothing for me. So I like your comments on that because I have been much happier since I've turned off the media. But I haven't found that I'm ignorant of what's going on because everybody that else is watching media and they tell me what's going on, and sometimes they get angry at me for not watching what's going on. So uh,
Thank you, Louis, for sharing that. And so, part of it is to watch our tendency of wanting to avoid the what we have now identified as the source of our suffering. That too is an erroneous view. The news itself is not the source of your suffering. Remember that. That's what's out there. Like how do you react, and how do you, and so that's why Master Shunyan share the practice of um, uh, avoiding avoiding certain sensory exposure, but he didn't say all of it. Remember the quote I read to you at the end. You must lick the honey. You must sustain yourself. Otherwise, you will die of starvation. He is pointing to this very strong tendency of practitioners toward asceticism. Remember the Buddha who almost died from not eating anything? Mm. So it's easy for us like, oh, TV's bad, that's bad, reading's bad. So before you know it, you are living in this sensory deprivation life. That's not right view. That's not right view. How do we live as an engaged member of our society if we do that? How do we bring benefit to sentient beings if we have no idea what's going on? This is why there's this movement of engaged Buddhism. It's because of this tendency for us to become completely disengaged and believing that it's good practice. Master Shunyan put this in deliberately. We have our responsibility to our community, to our society. And so living in a democracy involves need us to be properly informed. Otherwise, how do you exercise your right to vote as a citizen, for example? So this is our responsibility, and of course everything else at work, in the family, and so watch for this very strong tendency to want to uh, switch off, run away, and hide because it's very pleasant and comfortable. Unfortunately, that is not the right view.
Thank you. I do read the local paper,
Mhm,
but it's just local news,
mhm.
so I know when to vote.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, Changwu Fasher, are we good? I noticed we are over time. I'm very sorry that I did not start the
Well,
Q&A earlier. Yeah.
well, it's fine. Everybody's still staying here. uh, did you have a couple more minutes for allow maybe perhaps one more question?
Sure.
And then we'll end today's talk here. Would anyone would like to grab this precious opportunity for the very last question? And meanwhile, I have already sent in the electronic copy of the book that Rebecca drew her teaching from until we reach the Buddhahood. That's the first volume of the series of talk that Master Shen Yan gave on the Shuragama Sutra. You can find the electronic copy in the chat room here. Okay. Anybody? Any more questions? Second time. Okay. And then one more time, last chance. Any questions? Okay.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here, and for Changwu Fashi to give me this opportunity to reflect on this particular topic. And perhaps I will practice with some of you in the upcoming 3-day retreat towards the later part of May. So thank you.
Okay. Here you can see I bring up the post of the 3-day retreat, May 22nd, started this Saturday evening and to May 24, Monday afternoon. And here's her latest book, Allow Joy into Our Hearts. Now, as this book is available on Amazon US and also Amazon Canada. If you have the Kindle, now they have a special sale for Kindle version, less than $1. Please grab that opportunity, okay? All right. And I'd like to thank Rebecca and everyone here today for the talk. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.